And a jolly good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And this morning our guest to discuss various aspects of transparency is Mr. Asoka Obesekera. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, first.
And nice to see you back on the program.
Indeed, glad to be here.
And Mr. Obesekera, tell us please, how fares transparency in terms of information from government to people?
I think it's a work in progress still.
Right.
Ultimately, we have a public service which has been anchored in opacity.
Right.
So the fact that we have things like the Right to Information Act, amongst other things right now, is an encouraging step forward, but there's work to be done.
There's work to be done. So in the words of the Speaker of Sri Lanka's Parliament, who's fond of saying, could be better.
Indeed, but I think it's also it's early days.
Right.
So I think the fact that public authorities have been approaching things like RTI with an open mind is very encouraging. Even at TISL, we've had an opportunity of filing public interest by RTI requests, and we've seen some which have actually unlocked information that we would have never have thought would have been unlockable.
Right.
So it's encouraging.
It's encouraging.
Yeah.
Now then, the Minister of Education, Akhila Viraj is quoted in the press as saying that they'll have a committee to look into these RTI requests. Isn't that sort of counter to all this business about having a RTI officer and so on and so forth, that process? What is the minister within his rights to?
I mean, I think the fact that the minister is packaging things in the form of a committee, it would be okay as long as there is an information officer and a designated officer. Right. The fact that the information officer chooses to have a committee of people that he discusses things with, as long as the information officer sort of follows through with their commitments under the RTI Act, I don't think there's a problem in having a committee.
Right.
As long
as you're not bypassing the RTI officer.
Indeed. So the information officer has to be the one communicating the initial responses. If there's any appeal, that has to go to the designated officer. All of those things would have to remain.
So you will need an information officer, we need a designated officer?
Yeah.
Who is separate from the information officer?
Well, you see, the thing is, in reality, you appeal, if the information officer refuses some information, you would appeal that to the designated officer.
Right.
Now, in reality, the designated officer and the information officer may have been having breakfast together for the last 20-odd years.
Yeah.
So the idea that they are completely independent of one another in reality there's a question mark there.
Yeah.
But on paper, the designated officer should be able to take an objective, independent decision. But obviously, if the designated officer blocks the release of some information, then you have the RTI commission that you have to appeal to.
Right. Well, I in my personal capacity, asked for details of people, elected officials, from whether they're parliamentarians or provincial councillors or whatever. I wanted to know from the Elections Commissioner how many of these people had not supplied the asset declaration, and also I wanted it broken down by the different parties. But all I got towards the tail end of the 2 weeks was a acknowledgement that my request had been received, and that the information I wanted had been requested from another department. In this case, I believe they said from the Presidential Secretariat. But I was a bit put out because 2 weeks have come and gone, and there's nothing really happening. I feel that it's being lip service. Is there a lot of that?
So I mean, now in our own experience, there have been some excellent examples of public authorities handling RTI requests. On the other end of the spectrum, there have been some disappointments. I would say that actually our experience with the Elections Commission has actually been excellent.
Yes, yes.
And the Elections Commission has been almost a model public authority in handling RTI requests.
Right.
The Elections Commission, in our regard, released all of the political party financial statements.
Right.
And there's an interesting story that emanates from that, but maybe I can get onto that in a moment. But in looking at your request, the Elections Commission should really be in a position to make that decision themselves, unless they felt that the information that was being requested was held within a different public authority. But I think in this particular circumstance, from what I'm hearing from you, this is information which is within the Elections Commission.
Yes, because I also understand that the Elections Commission had forwarded this to the Bribery Commissioner.
Right.
So, you know, I, as a member of the public, also wanted to know the details of that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you feel that within 14 working days, your response to your initial information request was not entertained, you can actually appeal that to the designated officer within the Elections Commission.
Right.
But I mean, my experience of the Elections Commission has been a positive one, and I think they approached RTI in the right spirit. So, I mean, hopefully you'll have a solution shortly.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we should hope for that. Now then, what interesting detail did you elicit from those financial statements from the political parties?
Well, I think what we found, well, for the first time we had the published audited accounts of the political parties provided to us. First thing that we did was we scanned it and we uploaded it. So we have a RTI platform called RTI where all of the information requested.
RTI Watchdog
LK. Yeah. And so all of the information requests we put out are recorded there, and the information received. So the first thing we did was we received that information, we scanned it, and we uploaded it online. And I think what was interesting was that the next morning there was a headline in the Daily News which said, JVP the richest party. Now, there's an issue here, which is that the financial statements may say that, but there is a big issue, which is that when car permits, let's say, are sold by or transferred by members of parliament, many of them take that money and they put it into their pocket.
As is their right.
But now the JVP has been getting that money, JVP MPs, and they put that money into the party.
Into the party pot.
Indeed. Now, it's similar to the way that JVP MPs also do that with their salaries.
Salaries, yes.
Now, to turn around and then say JVP richest party, because the JVP recognizes certain things through their financial processes, I think if you're going to say richest party, you also have to do the analysis of
the others.
Of the fact that JVP recognizes their the income of that party in a different way to others. Just by saying that they're the richest party may be slightly irresponsible. But on the flip side, we're delighted that the Daily News journalist as well was actually willing to go through a data set, go through the financial statements and try to dig out a story from there. So I think that's quite interesting. But also what's very, very interesting is that we hear about the common sums which are being paid by members of parliament when they're contesting general elections. And when you start looking at the party finances, I mean, based on what you hear anecdotally, a typical candidate for a main political party in a big district would be spending sums of money which may be around 50% of the income of their party.
Yes, that's just one person.
Indeed. So I mean, there are some concerns here. One other thing that I'll tie into the asset declaration request that you're making is that if, let's say, other members of parliament aren't recognizing the money that they're getting for their car permits, are they recognizing that inflow of money in their asset declaration? Is it there in the balances in the...
Is income an asset?
Indeed. a declaration of assets and liabilities, but those assets also are looking at bank accounts, things like that. So on one side, if you're not recognizing that sort of money through your party, like the JVP is, then do you recognize it in your personal capacity through your asset declaration? So I mean, that's an important question, and that's why asset declarations also need to be out in the public domain, like they are in India and our neighboring countries. I mean, we are a few steps behind here, and I'm also very aware of the fact that asset declarations were always envisaged as being a part of RTI.
Right.
So, you know, this is a...
But you yourself, your organization has been at the receiving end of a letter from the Prime Minister's office to say that asset declarations are not covered by RTI.
Indeed. So, I mean, on one side, I guess it's encouraging that the Prime Minister's office is approaching...
Are they playing ball?
Well, I mean, their information officer, designated officer, have responded to our RTI requests. It's now for us to appeal that to the Commission.
Right.
So also one has to also be a little, I mean, on issues like asset declarations, you can see that those are very, very contentious areas.
Yeah. And
so maybe it is the Commission that may need to actually look into this and see whether asset declarations really form a part of the scope of RTI,
right,
which I'm very confident it does.
Now, on sort of similar vein, in a similar vein, what about these trade agreements that are reached between the government, our government, and other countries?
Yeah.
Is that also material to fall within the RTI?
Well, trade agreements have actually been specifically identified within the exemption section of the RTI Act, but it is only when the disclosure of such information would cause serious prejudice to the economy of Sri Lanka by disclosing prematurely decisions to change or continue government economic or financial policies. So I mean, just by saying it links to a trade agreement, it has to be the premature disclosure of information as well. So I think it's fair to say that when a trade agreement is being negotiated, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I think it's accepted not only here, but, well, no, I'm not sure if it's accepted here, but as a general practice, the idea that a country has to, you know, keep its, hide its cards whilst it's negotiating trade agreements, that is maybe an established fact in some places, but just by saying it's about a trade agreement is not enough. It has to be the premature disclosure of information. So if it's a trade agreement that has been already finalized, maybe you can request information on that process.
Yes, but by that argument, it may be all too late, because some of these things we talk about are valuable state assets, like the harbour, Matala Airport, and so on, even reclaiming the ocean. And these are all part of the family silver, so to speak, the national family silver.
Indeed.
So on what rational basis can they expect the people of this country to wait to find out? Because, you know, we waited, and even now, even though we have a Presidential Commission of Inquiry, we don't know much more about the bond matter, for example. And why wait? I mean, the longer we wait, these matters get entrenched into the system. And then, therefore, it gets harder to correct as we go along. And when it's financial matters, you know, the money may all have been spent.
I completely agree with you, Faraz. And actually, I mean, I guess let's say on the matter of trade agreements. In a way, the government has the mandate to negotiate trade agreements for the country. The fact of the matter is, and I'm not a government apologist by any means on this, but the idea that, I mean, if the government turns around and says, it's in the best interest of the country that we do not disclose what we are negotiating during the negotiation.
So we the people will have to put up and shut up.
I mean, when it comes to trade negotiations, I think that it is, I mean, when someone turns around and says that it is in the best interests that our negotiating hand is not made public whilst we're negotiating, it is a fine line, and that's why the actual process of negotiation and other things needs to be a very solid one and very well documented. Now that's the problem. The problem is that I don't think there is a lot of faith in the process that would be going on behind the scenes.
Whilst you're saying this, Ashok, there's a great deal of mirth brewing in my mind because, for example, these trade agreements, we don't know. We're waiting now to be told after the event, which is going to be then too late for any changes or for public opinion to be taken into account. And one such thing is the trade agreement with India. And it doesn't seem to be designed to meet the needs of our country as a matter of policy, and doesn't seem to be focused. It's like a general thing. And take the instance of the palm oil. The Indians didn't seem to care tuppence whether this palm oil was actually not manufactured here. It was imported from, say, Malaysia. And then it was packed here and then exported from here to India under this agreement.
The existing agreement.
Yes, so what's the point? I mean, this was just to make a commission, or if you like, on the way. The employment opportunities are ultra limited here. So where does it don't you think this trade agreement should be focused on the need of the country?
So I think in that regard, I think I think the government has a responsibility to proactively maybe engage citizens on some of the areas in which a trade agreement will cover and how it will better the lives of citizens. But whether they need to disclose all of the nitty-gritty of how they're negotiating it and the details of what they're willing to, the bargain chips that they're willing to put forward to secure other things, those are things I'm not very well versed in, but the idea, let's say, within an RTI Act, the fact that the negotiation of international trade agreements is a exempted clause, that is something that is quite established in other RTI Acts around the world as well. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. The one thing that I would say, though, and this is where the challenge lies, is that there is discretion for any information officer to disclose information if they deem that the public interest outweighs the information, outweighs the harm caused by releasing the information. So that is a very empowering provision for a information officer. I think you and I both know that most information officers wouldn't have the courage to make that sort of call.
They wouldn't have the courage to be different, unlike our network, which is our tagline, the courage to be different. Now, for example, Ashoka, we are told that the Prime Minister is going to visit Mr. Modi, ahead of Mr. Modi's visit to this country. Now then, if I wanted to know what is in that draft MOU that he's carrying with him, and if I want to have a list of the agenda of what is to be officially discussed, isn't that a part of the RTI? Would it not fall squarely within the RTI?
An argument could be made that it does fall within the RTI Act. And I mean, actually, even the front page of the Sunday Times this week spoke about the President and him wanting to open cabinet memorandum also to RTI. So the idea that, let's say, documents which have those sorts of briefing notes and things like that, the fact that those could be accessed through RTI, I mean, it has to be tested. I would say that having spoken to people who are involved in this sort of area in Sri Lanka and in other countries as well, there is sometimes a feeling that when certain information is, let's say a briefing notes are put within the purview of RTI, does a bureaucrat actually best advise the government official? Because when they know that RTI may actually disclose some of their briefing notes in the future, do they actually record that information properly? Do they then end up going into sort of using informal channels to communicate information instead of using official channels?
Right.
So there are certain concerns about how that sort of like very sort of functional, practical document, when it falls within the scope of RTI, I mean, some of the challenges there. I know even now, for instance, within the RTI Act itself, it handles this matter of cabinet memorandum, and the fact that that sort of information can be released if it is, I think that the term that I'm looking for, I can't quite lay my finger on it right now, but the fact that it is, if it is a part of cabinet memorandum and the decisions have already been taken, then that information can be released.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that is also a potentially very empowering provision. But I think what I would say right from the outset also on something like this is the fact that these are almost sort of like public interest RTI requests. Right? People like yourself and even organizations like our own are trying to seek the release of information that will better help us understand how the state, how government is functioning. But I would say that the main success of RTI will be anchored around whether a citizen will feel empowered to go and ask and file an RTI request for their own betterment.
I think quite often people, the average person, might feel intimidated in doing that.
Absolutely, and actually, what we have seen already, I mean, there are people who come to the Transparency International office and they want us to almost hold their hand through filing an RTI request. And we've seen the way in which people are sent from one person to the next person within a public authority, and I mean, you can easily spend an afternoon going between people. I mean, we've seen that in certain circumstances. But on the other side, we've seen places which know who their information officer is, and they really facilitate a request very, very well. So I mean, I think the issue though is that we are ultimately coming from a society where things are requested informally.
Right.
The idea that you document and you put a request on paper that has a 14 working day time limit to get a response, that's unfamiliar. That's an unfamiliar process to us. And very often, I know from an experience with a public authority, there's a public authority that we work with closely that we filed an RTI request at. And then their immediate response was, my goodness, I mean, we work closely together. Does this mean that we're not collaborating any longer? We said, no. I mean, we're very glad of being able to work together, but we also want to show that the RTI Act works and we want to get this information out there. So there is this sort of a mindset change also, which is that the fact that you're filing an RTI request doesn't mean that I am against you. That just means that I'm trying to get that information within a prescribed time frame, which I can publish, and the information which I can publish. Whereas using informal routes all the time, I mean, is what people are more accustomed to.
Yes. I mean, if I'd want to find out, for example, this is not as pedantic as it may sound, but if I'm stopped by a traffic policeman who's pointing the speeding gun and says, look, that's what you've done. And if I have this sneaking suspicion that that machine might not be calibrated and is giving a wrong reading, how can I insist on getting the the service record of that particular unit.
So then you can file an RTI request at the relevant police station, and if they don't have a designated officer, then I mean you just send it to the sort of
the area head.
Yeah, I mean it wouldn't be the OIC. It would, I mean,
could be the headquarters inspector.
Yeah, but. All in all, actually, you probably give it to the OIC if there's no designated officer there, because the head of a particular branch would be, or a particular station in this regard, would be considered the de facto person.
But would they have to disclose that?
Well, if it's information, I mean, ultimately RTI is not about getting answers to every single thing, but it's about the release of information. So you are speaking about the service record.
Yeah.
So I mean, unless they say that there is a reason for it to be exempted, and off the top of my head I can't think of a single reason why that service record should not be released. That's certainly a question that you can ask, but the challenge here for us is that there is something just there which is the complicated bit that you handled in a very easy fashion, but that's where the challenge is. You have to understand what information you are requesting. Now, you spoke about the service record of that particular speeding gun.
Right.
But that is, the challenge is actually understanding and asking for the actual information, and that could be recorded within that public authority. Now, many people may file an RTI request saying, does that speed, I think your speed guns are faulty. That is not an information request. The information request is to ask for, let's say, as you said, the service record of the speed gun. So understanding that is the challenge.
I see. But back to these trade agreements, it's all very dodgy, really, that we seem not to be able to, it's almost like the public are being fobbed off. I particularly feel that I'm being fobbed off with my request that I'd made. Somebody else I know, also a journalist, has requested from the Ministry of Finance a breakdown of all the advertising that the Ministry of Finance has done on whatever. I can imagine that this is an enormous sort of project to compile, because there are so many newspapers and so on. And if the journalists had just sort of said, well, we want to know how much you spent with the island, that might have been easier.
Do you know if the journalist has got a response?
He's got exactly what I got, a acknowledgement. Within 14 days he got the acknowledgement.
Right.
So it looks like this RTI is working in fits and starts. Well, it's working.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, from the central bank last week, we received a breakdown of all of the EPF investments in listed equities.
Right.
So what we got was the way the decision-making process and what the EPF thinks through before they make a investment decision. We got the current mix of investments. So looking at government securities, unlisted. Listed equities, and it's quite interesting.
Yes, now that's very interesting. My question was going to be about that, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at the figures, in 2012, 2013 and 2014, you see that EPF has invested 5 billion, 8 billion and 4 billion rupees respectively, so for 2012, 13, 14, in listed equities. In 2015-16, after the change of government, that has declined dramatically to around 1.2 billion rupees for 2015 and 2016. So it's clear, I don't know, I'm not in the position to ascribe motive or reason, but it's clear on just on the basic analysis of it that the EPF is not being used aggressively to support local listed equities in the way it was before the last presidential election.
Right. Well, perhaps we need to discuss that, and perhaps the members of the public can actually, under the RTI, make a request from the PF to disclose all the debt instruments like bonds and so on that they have purchased, other than from the central bank as a primary dealer. In short, how much and what they bought on the secondary market, because that will then throw a huge spotlight on their activities in terms of this so-called bond saga.
Indeed, and I mean, if a viewer is planning on filing a request like that, it may be useful to take a look at the request that we have already, the information that we've got from EPF. So we've scanned that up on rtiwatch.lk. You can go there, you can access the documents that we have received.
Right.
And I think the fact that information of that nature has been provided in a very user-friendly format by the central bank, or the EPF department of the central bank, will go along, I mean, has shown that they are supportive of releasing that sort of information, and maybe the next step would be to file a request of that nature.
Indeed, there you go, folks. rtiwatchdog.lk. rtiwatch.lk. rtiwatch.lk. That's the place you want to be, and you can get some make it interesting reading, actually. On that note, Asoka Obesekra, thank you very much for having joined us on Newsline.
Pleasure as always.
And we look forward to having you on various other programs in the fullness of time. That's it, and that's the way it was on Tuesday, the 25th of April, 2017. Take care. God bless.